Hey, everybody, Dr. Roseann here, and we're talking about OCD, anxious kids, and kids who really struggle. If you have a child who asks the same questions over and over, insists that you get involved in their rituals or panics when something isn't just right, well, they're struggling with anxiety and possibly OCD. And today I'm going to share the number one parenting strategy for kids with anxiety and OCD and how to stop rescuing them and start coaching them to calm their own brain and talk back to those fears and worries, because reassurance and accommodations may feel very helpful in the moment, but they fuel that fear, that anxiety, and certainly those compulsions in the long term. And as parents, we're meant to be coaches. We're not supposed to be fixers and rescuers, right? Which we often do when our kids are anxious. And teaching coping skills is actually the greatest gift you can give your kid, right? Regulating their nervous system, getting their nervous system to not be so reactive to things, but then giving them those skills that they can tackle things when it goes down is really helpful. And we know through clinical research that these kids are more successful. They don't struggle with mental health in the same way because pharma wants us to think that OCD, anxiety, ADD, these are all things you have to have all the time, right? And I don't mean ADD in that your brain is clinically that way, but there are a lot of reasons why kids have focus problems, anxiety, and it doesn't have to be genetic. And there are things we can do to always improve that, and parents have the power. So let's talk about what accommodation is. So basically, an accommodation is changing your behavior to prevent your child from having distress, right? And it doesn't mean like you get on an airplane and your kid's distressed and you're like, oh, I better help them because we're on an airplane. But if your go-to is always to rescue your child from distress, you got a problem. And I know OCD is a really beast thing, and so is having an anxious kid. I can tell you that I've had parents like actually discontinue working with us because they said it was too hard and it was easier to deal with whatever that worry was. And I can assure you that that worry is only going to grow and it's going to become a bigger thing, and you absolutely don't have to do that. Thankfully, that rarely happens. And what does happen is people are like, we're going to tackle it, and it goes away. Like, you can actually end OCD and anxiety. You can certainly improve it. There is no reason why you can't. Every brain can stop that habit. Don't let anybody tell you different. And it's probably, if you're dealing with a therapist or a provider who tells you something different, it's because they probably don't have the skills to help you. So examples of accommodation is, or those behaviors is seeking reassurance, right? Am I okay? Did I do this right? Is there germ on here? Or, I think I'm going to do bad on this test. What do you think? Those are reassuring questions, are very sneaky, and both kids with anxiety or OCD may need a high level of that. You don't want to get in there. It's quicksand. Okay. Avoiding things, avoiding tasks, fearful places, avoiding doing things that they're very capable of, that they're just afraid, right? And I hear this a lot from very capable bright kids, from their parents of those kids, that, oh boy, like they get held back. And one of the coolest things that I get to do is when I regulate the nervous system, right, with our Calm PEMF or our brain behavior reset program, I get to hear how that changes. So if you're interested in working with us in any capacity, take our solution match. You're going to go to drroseann.com/help. And it's just a quick little assessment where you get my insights into what you need. And it's a personalized assessment. And you'll get great emails and great information. And you'll get alerted to these episodes. And, we all need guidance. And I was just telling one of the moms that I was with that, when my Max was having struggles, even though I knew how to handle it, I still had guidance from trusted people because you rattle around in your own head and we just don't know how to support these kids. And you need somebody who's professional. Google MD is okay to search, and hopefully that's how you found me, but you need a community. You need people who get you. So, okay. So, and of course, kids with OCD have rituals of some kind, and they can be sort of hidden by those questions or different patterns. We always think of compulsions as being super observable. They may not be. And they usually, by the time they become observable, these patterns, they're so much bigger. It's truly the tip of the iceberg. When you start actually seeing behavior and then you look, it's like huge. And so when you're seeing things, please know there's probably a lot more that you're not seeing, because when kids have fears and worries, they're dark, they're scary, they could be really uncomfortable and weird and irrational, and so they don't want to talk about them. And we're talking kids of all ages, 25-year-olds to 5-year-olds, right? And depending on, even when you're really emotionally connected with your kids, they might not share it. So why does accommodation hurt, right? Why does alleviating your child's stress by answering those questions, allowing them to avoid, helping them with a ritual? Well, one, they actually reinforce the brain to keep repeating the behavior. So it's reinforcing the worry, right? You know that. So it prevents the child from learning how to tolerate. And instead, it says to the brain, I got a little relief. I'm just going to keep asking that question all the time because, my dad is answering that there's no monster under my bed, or it's not going to rain today, or I did okay on that test, whatever it is. But it traps you in an exhausting loop of anxiety, anxiety, rescue. And then what's happening, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it explodes, and it can turn into much more higher levels of clinical distress. It can lead to depression. It could lead to, God forbid, suicidal thoughts. It could lead to medical problems. You can get autoimmune diseases as a result of chronic nervous system distress. It blows up. If you leave it unchecked, right, and you keep accommodating, it's going to blow up. But accommodating feels loving in the moment, but it teaches the brain that anxiety wins. Okay. And so we got to break that cycle. It's the number one thing I'm talking about with my parents, right? And, I recently, had somebody where, they were like, I knew it from the time they were like 4 years old that she was an anxious kid. And, they saw that if they, answered her question or gave her, a little extra support, that she would settle down. So over time, it would sort of wax and wane and wax and wane. But when they looked back as a teenager, it just kept growing and growing and growing. So by the time she got to me, it started with anxiety, then it morphed into OCD, and then it was depression, right? So she had this huge mix, really resistant to getting help, because what happens when you go to a therapist, and they don't work with people with OCD, they treat it wrong. So they treat the worry, the anxiety, without really talking about the approach we're going to talk about, right? You have to be trained in high levels of care in order to have these complex cases. And so, especially with OCD. And so she would go to a therapist, and she didn't ever learn coping skills. She never learned a way, and her parents weren't taught that until they came to us. We worked with them in our brain behavior reset program, reset her nervous system, and then did the gold standard of care for OCD, and in this case, anxiety, which is exposure, response, and prevention. I'll talk a little bit about that. And she no longer has OCD, depression, and very, very controllable mild levels of anxiety that she's able to recognize tolerate and then reset to regulate. And she's, been doing that for a long time. So it's always awesome. Like it's this time of the year, it's springtime, and I get to see all my kids that I work with graduate from like middle school or high school or college. And I was telling somebody recently that I've had a lot of kids who were on the spectrum where they were very young and parents were told to institutionalize their kids. So I just saw in my Facebook feed one of those kids graduate from one of the most prestigious, you know, techie engineering schools in America. And this was a kid that they were told to institutionalize. And like, I've had this happen so many times. It's like a gift, you know what I mean? And it's such a blessing to have parents who say, bull donkeys, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to learn a different way. And this is a kid that was just like completely taken over by the autism, the OCD, the rituals, the stereotypical behaviors, and came out of that. So, and is doing phenomenal. And so he's not the only one. There's many times. So I feel really grateful, and I love to share those kinds of stories and get a reset the nervous system, get it to regulate, and teach skills people. So let's talk about the approach that you need, right? So it's a coaching approach. We're teaching coping. We're not rescuing. So we're going to talk about 7 steps to do that and what it looks like. So number 1, you're always going to prepare your child. You're going to tell them in advance, right, that we're going to practice managing our worries. Like, and you can say, you don't like feeling like this. This is what I always say to people. Do you like feeling like this? Nobody ever says, yes, I like feeling like this. But people don't like to give up their worries and fears because then the bad thing will happen. So you're always going to say, we're going to do this so you're stronger and braver. And when I have younger kids, actually, when I have kids of any age, I'm like, you're going to give it a kapow. You're going to give it a 1-2 punch. And, I get them to physically do it. Like, just, and it's empowering. It's scary, right? We can all do scary, hard things and still be empowered, right? We got to let them know. So 2, you're going to identify triggers together, right? So, I saw that was like a situation. I asked dad to make dinner instead of me, and maybe they had contamination fears, or your child is anxious about who's dropping them off at school and somebody else did. Like, okay, so, I saw that was hard for you. What do you think we can do? Right. 3, I like to give kids actually worry time. It's better to say, like, kids come at you with worry and worry and worry and worry. And if you say, well, you can't worry, like, that's not helpful either. We need a skill, right? So you can say, well, we're going to have 10 minutes at this time is your worry time, and you're allowed to talk to me about your worry. Then it's going to cut down on all those requests. They have a place for it. And even just the idea that they can have a space for it, it will help you, right? It's sort of like when you have all this stuff and you're like, oh my God, I have to throw it all out. And it's like, well, no, we're going to give you this much time. You can keep it in storage for this amount of time. And then you got to sort through it. Like, okay, all right, I don't have to do it tomorrow, kind of thing. And you have that. Number 4, you're going to coach those coping skills. This is the hardest part. I have lots of videos on this. This is just high level to really help you, because this is that time of year where it's an awesome time of year, as I said, where kids are moving on, but it's also a time of year where it's the end of a school year, or where a lot of those things that have been going on all year, like schools tell you, or you're starting to see the culmination, and you go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do next? This is what you're going to do. But always, when you need professional help, don't ever be afraid. Nobody ever regrets getting help. They only regret when they don't. But you do need to get qualified people. So you want to practice those coaching skills, right? So use statements like, I know you can handle this. We're going to talk a little bit about more what not to say and what to say. Is there sensory strategies that help? And maybe journaling, maybe doing a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique or breath work. We want to use those coping skills and reset skills, really important. And number 5, we want to counter with gentle questions, right? Hey, what can you say to that worry right now? That would help you. And maybe your kid's like, but over time, when you find these gentle coach, if you're only using this once in a while, you forget, right? Let's say you're using some kind of technology. Oh, I had to write my book in Microsoft Word. I'm going to say my novenas on that. I didn't remember how to use it. It's terrible. It doesn't make any sense. I still can't stand it. But now at least I have the basics, right? And I'm like, I better do some things in Microsoft Word. I'm like, it's my fourth book. It's not like I'm going away from writing. But in the publishing world, they only take Microsoft Word. And so practice helps with automaticity, and these reminders will really start cueing not just your child on that behavioral way, but in the nervous system, just activating in the right way and starting to do that. 6, you're going to model healthy coping skills, right? You can only do that if you're doing your co-regulation. That's the C in our comms. You've got to regulate. I don't care what you got to do. Like I say, go hide in the garage, do your breath work, get up 10 minutes early. You need to regulate first, and you've got to model not perfection, but how do you manage stress in a way that, like you have a problem, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I got this problem. This is what I gotta do," whatever. I mean, what's the plan? Really talk out loud. We call that metacognitive problem solving. But let them see something went wrong and you had to do breath work before you responded, or, I need a minute before I can answer you, before, those kinds of things. And number 7, we wanna praise progress, effort, not perfection. You are not going to overnight learn this. If your kid is verbalizing questions and has anxiety and has a way of avoiding, this is not an overnight fix. Here it is, kids. My magic wand is coming out. This is a shift into working smarter, not harder. And if you've ever felt trapped in this exhausting reassurance cycle, the small shift in teaching coping skills will change everything for you and your child. And, when you say like, if your child says, "Oh, will you check this for me?" You instead of saying, "I'm going to check this again for you," because you're trying to rescue, you can say, "I know you feel unsure. What's a strategy right now that could help you?" Or you can say, you felt this way yesterday and you stopped. What do you think that was? Right? These are all ways to get them to see in their own brain that the bad thing's not going to happen when you learn to cope with it. And that's how you unwind. This is the foundation of this, is exposure and response prevention. It's that gold standard, as I talked about, is what we use in our brain behavior reset program. But every time you answer, every time you help them avoid, you are accommodating. You are feeding the barking dog in an anxious, worried, or obsessive child. And you don't have to do that. If you want more strategies, you can go to drroseann.com/help, and you can find out about our brain behavior reset program or any of our things. We have lots of ways and paths, but you have to learn and then take action. And you have that ability, and we have lots of resources. You just got to click on those emails, listen to the podcast, and take action. And whether it's getting help with us or somebody else, when you have a highly anxious child, and certainly a child with OCD, don't wait. Nobody ever regrets getting that help, and you shouldn't either. So with patience, consistency, and the right tools, you can absolutely learn to calm your brain. Your child can do that. You can do that. And these type of obsessive worries and compulsive behaviors can be over. Don't let anybody tell you anything different.